Thank you very much. I go by Sampath because the first name and the middle name are long and complicated. So everybody calls me Sampath for the first name and the last name. So please do the same. And what I'm going to talk about is a large amount of collaboration we have had with many groups, including UT Austin here, CSU, ASU, NREL, and this. And I'm going to talk about thin film telluride photovoltaics for solar cells. Now, most of the solar panels that you buy today, 95% of them are silicon. That is the absorber that converts the sunlight to electricity. We are talking about a different material, cadmium telluride, which is a compound semiconductor. It's also a direct band gap. So you need much less of the material and much less purity and much faster processing, all that. But yet, silicon is 95% of the market and CAD telluride is 5%. So why is that so? What can we do? And why did this situation develop? I'll go over that. The outline of my talk is I'll go over CAD telluride overview and research at CSU. And this may be a little bit getting into the weeds of the research, but I'll try to avoid it as much as possible. And then I'll compare the silicon PV to CAD telluride PV. The big difference here is this is made in China, and this is made in the US, and it's on par competitively, performance-wise and competitively in cost-wise. So there is some advantages there. There's only one company that makes large amounts of this for solar highlights, and many of our students work there. And I'll talk about where they are and where they are going, how we can advance the CAD telluride photovoltaics to exceed and make energy and future steps. Now, I want you to understand our vision is to make photovoltaics the energy solution. So that's what we drive ourselves by, and there is a little bit of a disconnect sometimes when you think about much smaller areas. Now, this is the European Union vision of how electricity is going to be generated. And so this is 2015, and you may think about this to be somewhat similar, analogous to where we are, mostly coming from fossil fuels and fossil gas, and very little from solar back then. It's a little more now. But by 2050, the view is that it's going to be mostly solar for electricity generation, 69%. And then it's going to be wind, 18%, and this is hydro, very little of the nuclear and fossil fuels. This is the European Union's view of how the energy generation is going to occur. So me and Brian created the Next Generation PV Center, NGPV, which is funded by NSF, very little of it, but most of the support comes from industries. And over the years, we have had quite a few companies come and quite a few companies move away. And these are all the list of companies that have been involved. And solar research since 1991. And 1991, we got the idea that making solar like if you made aluminum cans. If you go through an aluminum can line, about 2,000 cans go through a minute. The plant produces about 1 billion cans a year. Now, if you assume that making 1 watt of solar panels is about the same level of difficulty as 1 can, and later on I'll show you that it's a lot easier than that, that it should be the way we make our energy. I came and told my boss that and said, boss, I think I figured it out, that we have to make solar panels just like we make, high volume, high throughput, lean manufacturing was the answer to the energy solution. He said, it's all well and good, start it after you get your tenure. Don't do it before that. I don't want you to get into trouble. So I waited. I mean, this project is at least 2-3 years behind because of that, but it may have been a prudent statement from my boss. So this is where CAD telluride solar stands today. In 1991, there wasn't much of anything. There wasn't a factory, there wasn't a manufacturing, there were no installations, and it has come from them to now about 50 plus gigawatts installed worldwide. Now you might think that that's a large number, but if you compare it to crystalline silicon, it's close to 1 terawatt plus and climbing. So it's not that large when you just compare it to crystalline silicon. And here is a large plant somewhere in the Arizona desert. And if you look at the cost of electricity generation, no subsidies here. And you talk about coal, nuclear, gas peaking, diesel, and thin film CAD telluride, it's about 2.5 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour in large fields in power purchase agreements. This is actual selling price with no subsidies involved in the whole thing. And hence, it's a lot more less it's easier to sell, the costs are lower. And this was estimated with 13% modules. Today, the modules are going to 19%, and so there is progressive improvement in the technology. So what do we do at CSU? And since there are not that many groups in the world working on CAD telluride, we have had to do everything from front to back. And what I mean by front to back is we solve the Schrodinger's wave equation, quantum mechanics on the atomic level, to looking at it in the material science. And I'll show you evidence of all this as we go along. And most of the effort comes from improving the device structure. How can we make higher efficiencies? How can we get more electricity out of the solar panel? That's what we do. And one of the recent ones that's out on display that some of you might have taken a look at, we are also doing a new module architecture. We did that for CAD telluride, commercialized it for CAD tel, but now we are extending that to silicon and perovskites, which is another newer material on the horizon to do this kind of architecture where you don't glue the whole panel, you only glue the edge. And then it has some improvement in performance compared to standard module. And we have actually involved, we meaning me and my students have actually been involved in designing production systems. And this is one of the systems that was partially developed, built by a company, but by us. And we also do advanced process hardware where we make better films. And we also work on coatings on the top surface that sheds the snow and the dirt and so on and so forth. So this is our claim to fame, that this is the structure we have finally developed that is our highest performing device structure. We get a glass coated with fluorinated tin oxide. This is what is called as low-E glass. It's a commercial product and sells for about $10 a meter square. It's quite low cost. And then we invented this material, mag zinc oxide, that is put on top of it. And some of the leading companies are beginning to use this now. And then we start with CAD selenium telluride and then CAD telluride, and we blend the stuff together. So there is a selenium blending that goes on from the top to bottom, and the total thickness is about 4 micrometers. An average human hair is 70 microns thick. So you're talking about very, very small amount of material that is required to make the solar light into electricity. That's one of the big advantages of this technology. And then we put a tellurium layer at the back and then carbon and nickel paint, and that completes the device. The best we have done is 20.14%. The best silicon is 26%, and the best CAD telluride that has been done by the company for solar is 23%. So it's not that different in terms of performance compared to the best of silicon, but we need to really crank up. Now, the big advantage of cadmium telluride is the manufacturing of it. And you can see how this manufacturing happens. This was a system we had in the lab, and that was commercialized by Abound Solar. It's a sheet metal belt made of Inconel that goes around like this. And we cut pieces of the fluorinated tin oxide material and put it in. And we have a tunnel which is partially pumped, and the glass would come in. And there are 9 process stations. They are all identical hardware. This is graphite heated by lamps that vaporize the material and deposit. And so glass comes in and gets heated, and then we deposit the N layer, the P layer, the CAD chloride treatment, and put a back contact. We didn't invent the CAD chloride process, but we kind of refined it to be this inline continuous vacuum process. We did do quite a bit of work on the back contact. When we started in 1991, the consideration was CAD telluride cannot be made to work because back contacting is hard. You need copper for back contacting, and copper is unstable because it moves in. It's still a prevalent theory, by the way, but the point we brought out, and this is our key contribution to the CAD telluride technology itself, that small amounts of copper, well controlled, well done, you can have acceptable stability. And I'll show you later on. Arsenic does a slightly better job than copper, but copper, you can live with it. There are current production lines that run on copper, slightly different form of copper than what we did, and you get one device every 2 minutes. So this fully lean automated manufacturing, this whole system as is was commercialized, meaning that it was scaled to 2 feet by 4 feet, and it works in manufacturing in production. This is a lot simpler way to make solar panels than you think about silicon, and I'll show you what goes on in making silicon structure. And so glass goes in and one cell comes out every 2 minutes. This system has been very helpful in defining a lot of process effects because you can just vary one thing in a place and then see what happens. And so this has been very helpful in defining many things that are affecting the CAD telluride process. So here is the belt system has then been, after commercialization, was converted to this inline magnetic system, which is what is there currently. And it does the same job as the belt system, but it's a little bit more flexible. And then we have another material we work with, cadmium-magnesium telluride for deposition. And we have sputter deposition and plasma. These 4 systems together has been the main workhorse of making cadmium telluride solar panels, solar cells, and get it to be this 20% efficient. So here is what goes on inside the machine. There is a magnetic arm that transports the substrate to the 9 process station. These are the heating, the N-type material, the P-type material, the cat chloride, and the copper. And then we bring one out every minute. And this is the main workhorse of our laboratory. And we are also exploring with not just vaporizing one material, but vaporizing 2 material and blending it together. And that leads to better composition, better performance, and so on and so forth. Sorry. Oops. Okay, so this is where I was. We do a lot of work, as I mentioned, on understanding what happens in the microstructure. If you had said a few years ago that you could make this quality films and convert this much of light to electricity with a microstructure that looks like this, where there are a lot of grain boundaries and a lot of defects essentially, but still make that kind of percentages, it all depends on passivating the grain boundaries. You have to make sure that the grain boundaries are not harmful. And we have shown progressively modifying the microstructure improves the performance, and that's how we make good solar panels. Now, I also want to mention that we do modeling of the quantum mechanics of what goes on at the interface. Here is an interface between 2 grains. And if you only passivate it with chlorine, you get donor states and acceptor states that are not as good. And if you do only selenium, they don't passivate that well. But if you combine with chlorine and selenium, they make donor states, which is a good passivation. And we are some of the early applicants of the density functional theory modeling to the cadmium telluride solar structure. A lot of the work we do is defining process sensitivity. How does the thickness of this material affect? How much the temperature affects? How much the background gas affects? All of that. You couldn't do that without the continuous inline system. And that's been very helpful to us. And here is an example of varying the thickness of the first layer and looking at what happens to the process. And here you can see that there's a dramatic effect if you change the cat selenium telluride thickness. If it's all cat selenium telluride, it's 3% efficiency. And as you may add more and more cat telluride at the back, the efficiency climbs. And here is a 19% device, 19% consistent production. When I show this chart, it's an average of about 25%, 25 different cells that have been made on this condition, and their thing is being compared. Okay, now one of the recent findings is that when you add selenium to cadmium telluride, it improves the lifetime. When you see a bright cathodoluminescence, it means that the defects have been somewhat mitigated. So this region corresponds to that region right there where there is more selenium. And then there is tellurium at the back, which is cadmium telluride here. And so the cadmium selenium telluride alloy is a better material from lifetime point of view and from this defect emission reduction point of view compared to plain cat telluride itself. And that's one of the future efforts for us to make whole devices that way. We talked about copper doping. And recently we have started to look at arsenic doping as a replacement for copper. And here it shows that by doing certain process conditions, you can go from undoped material to an arsenic doped material. And here is an example of secondary ion mass spectroscopy and looking at it and comparing it to the CV profile, looking at selenium arsenic concentration to how many holes that are being produced. And we get about 20% activation here, which is quite high for this technology. Now, here are comparisons of 3 different soil slides. This is no copper or no arsenic. Here is a copper and arsenic. And these are all 18.9, 19% devices that we have made on the system. And these are also some of the highest lifetime that we have measured among the CST cat telluride device. 258 nanoseconds, 213. If you didn't have all the passivations and the selenium and the other treatments, you couldn't get these kinds of numbers. It will be like in the less than 10 nanosecond kind of range. So here is where I want to summarize our work with CAD telluride. We have high efficiency, 20.14%, demonstrated with thermal sublimation on soda lime glass. And this is all done in modest vacuum. You don't have to pull the vacuum to 10 to the minus 8 or minus 10 or something like that, that even just 10 to the minus 3 and minus 4 vacuum level is good enough to make good devices. And the structure that we have evolved is MZO, CAD selenium telluride, CAD telluride, copper, carbon, and nickel. And the MZO device, it's the MZO film itself, evolved from our lab. The major contribution, as I see it, that led the industry move forward was the idea that you could put copper in the controlled conditions. We did this for this company, for solar itself, on their material. When the main investors were having a difficult time funding the project, when you couldn't show stability, we showed that with small amounts of copper, that you can make it live acceptable. It's not great stability. With very high temperatures, you can have some problems. But if you leave it outdoors and you don't cross 65 degrees C, with mild controlled amounts of copper, you can make it work. And this is our key contribution. Mag zinc oxide as a buffer, as a transmitted, as an effective transparent emitter, was developed in our lab, and that has been, that is currently being used by the major company for solar today in their devices. Arsenic doping, comparable performance to copper doping with more lifetime and more stability. And this may be the evolving device structure where the copper is being replaced with arsenic. And it's also already some trial modules are coming out with that material. CST has high lifetime in microseconds. Typical lifetime of CAD telluride is on the 2 nanosecond range. Selenium improves the performance of the photon-generated electron-hole pairs and lasts quite a bit of time more than it would do in CAD telluride. Now here is where it gets interesting. We have demonstrated an implied efficiency of 26.5%. This was done with the ASU and National Renewable Energy Lab, demonstrated with CAD selenium telluride absorber, where the whole composition is just CAD selenium telluride. It reduces the intensity of tellurium and has a potential to go further up, and this would put us in par with crystalline silicon, and this effort is quite a bit underway to realize this, and this is my summary of what we have done on CAD telluride. I'm going to pause here a little bit because I want to switch the thinking to silicon next and how that happens. Any question at all on this one up to this point so far? We'll have a question and Q&A session at the end. Yeah, there's somebody who has a question.
I don't know if it's better at the end or not. I'll just ask it. So how different is this? How much more advanced is this than First Solar? And it seems like First Solar is demonstrating CAD Tel in the marketplace. And so this makes it even better. So how long before your great technology sort of trickles down into commercialization? Or maybe I missed that you've already got it in commercialization.
Well, we work very closely with First Solar. Some of our students are the CTOs and all that kind of stuff. So it's not very different from what we do versus what First Solar does. So we are very close. But it's a one-way traffic. All the information we generate, we pass it over. We hear indirectly what happens. But some of the things do make it through and in the farm.
So this has demonstrated your work already in the marketplace, already being competitive. So that's
not the all CADs, the uniform CAD selenium telluride alloy is not in the marketplace. The graded one is in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let me move on to comparing silicon PV to CAD telluride PV. Now if it was a normal world and a normal business situation, you wouldn't have CAD telluride being 5% and silicon being 95%. Here is what it takes to make CAD telluride module, and here is what it takes to make a silicon module. Now, this slide itself comes from First Solar. In all interest, I want to say, because it was nice. I had 4 or 5 slides describing that, but this is a single slide. So in CAD telluride manufacturing, we start out with a piece of glass. Today, it is 6 feet by 4 feet and increasing. That's one single piece that moves through the line is 6 by 4 piece of glass. We do a semiconductor deposition, and that's done in 40 seconds. The whole semiconductor layer that converts light to electricity is done in 40 seconds. And then there are a few more processes that go on, which are of similar speeds and complexity. And we define the cell by laser scribing, because you can't have a single cell that will be low voltage and high current. Here you want higher voltages and acceptable current. So you do the cell definition, and then a polymer is glued at the back and gets sealed and put together, and then we get a module. It takes about 3.5 hours to go from glass to a module in a line where there are about 10 people on the line. It's coming to the CAN vision, right? And there are very few people. It's going continuous in line, and the nearly consistent production. So what does it take for silicon manufacturing? First, you have to make polysilicon. Polysilicon is the 99 some 5%, 79 pure material, raw material here. There's a large amount of steps involved in making this. There is not that many steps involved in making the cadmium telluride semiconductor. We work closely with the 5N+ people, and they make the starting material for this line. Now, once you got a polysilicon, you make an ingot. You melt it down and slowly cool it, and it takes days. You can't cool it fast. There is a problem. And then you get a wafer. You have to slice it off into slices, and then you have to clean the defects that you have created on the surface. And then you make a solar cell, which has got many, many steps. It's not completely inline, automated line and not all that takes to make a solar cell. And then it takes some more efforts to make an output module. And then this takes 3 days and 4 factories. So this is 3 hours and 1 factory. This is 3 days and 4 factories. So you would, on the normal course of events, think that this will be 95% and this will be 4%, and it's not. And the reason for that are several. I mean, we can go through it in the question and answer session. I want to stick to the technical stuff at this point. And here is the data I have from 2017. This is extremely old data and tells you the net cash position of cadmium telluride company versus the silicon company. Now, this situation might be very different today. I don't have the data. I had this slide, and so I put it up. So point in being that it's very difficult to make money making crystalline silicon panels. That's why most of it comes from China. And Chinese government has made the polysilicon plant is the big problem, and so they have created a GCL Poly, which produces 90% of the world's polysilicon material. And so that's one of the main differences here. And we have compared, at one point in history, a CAD telluride panel with a silicon panel. This was done in Bangkok with our collaborators from the Asian Institute of Technology. And the blue curve is cadmium telluride, and the other color with the yellow and the black dots is crystalline silicon. These were all same vintage, and here was a 1 month of comparison. And you can clearly see that the CAD telluride panels produce more power than comparative product of crystalline silicon. It can be anywhere from 10% to 5% increase in power, everything else being the same. So the difference in efficiency is kind of wiped out when you look at hot, humid climates and look at the amount of power produced. And then there is a question of cadmium in the cadmium telluride panel itself. Cadmium is a heavy metal which is not occupationally safe. How much cadmium is emitted into the environment that can get into the human system? And here is the work from Brookhaven National Lab, which talks about how many grams of cadmium is emitted per gigawatt hour, depending on the different technologies of making electricity. And first thing you notice here is that silicon actually emits more cadmium in the manufacturing process than cadmium telluride itself. And that's because it takes a lot more energy to make silicon panels. And more energy comes from a variety of, by burning coal, burning oil, burning whatever. And all of those have, on an average, this amount of cadmium emission. So if you compare the silicon to the cadmium telluride, the amount of cadmium that goes into the air in making cadmium telluride panels is less than the amount of cadmium that goes into the air in making silicon panels. So it is an advantage from that point of view. So here is a summary of comparison between this. Competitive with silicon without subsidy, the US Department of Commerce estimates the silicon subsidy is about 165%. I don't know if that's true or not, but this is a number that our Department of Commerce came with a few years ago. This is not the current number that I don't have. it takes 100 times less semiconductor material that can be 100 times less pure. Because it's a direct band gap, it doesn't have to be the 7-9 pure. Silicon is an indirect band gap, so it has to be 7-9 pure. And making the 7-9 pure is a difficult challenge compared to making a 4-9 pure material telluride, and hence this second constraint. It's a simpler automated manufacturing process that you start with large pieces of glass, they are all vapor deposited as it goes, and then in 3 hours later you have a full-blown module. Comparable efficiencies and up to 11.2% more power density in warmer climates than silicon. And life cycle analysis says that less cadmium emission from cadmium telluride than silicon modules. And there is also a concern about the availability of tellurium. Tellurium is not a rare earth, not the rare sense. It is one of the rarest elements on Earth. It's on the same level as platinum. So there is one project we have where we are trying to reduce the amount of tellurium. It's no problem short term, but long term, we may have to figure out a way to, if we want this technology to be as volume as silicon, we need to solve this problem of tellurium being this. So thin film advantages, 2.5 times labor cost per gigawatt production. Field degradation, its telluride degrades 2.5 less than crystalline silicon in hot humid climates. If you go to the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, they have how different modules are performing throughout India laid out on the map of India, and the one technology that meets the specification in terms of degradation is the telluride modules, that in cold climates, warm climates, in humid climates, it does very good. And up to 20% more power output than crystalline silicon in hot humid climates, and 100 times less semiconductor than this, and 24 times less process time, 3 days versus 3 hours. And electricity costs, if you compare, ultimately what matters is the cost of electricity. If you calculate this with this reference, unsubsidized, it is 16% less than crystalline silicon. And here are some numbers. And then the next point I want to talk about is the First Solar highlights. They are projecting to have a manufacturing capacity exceeding 25 gigawatts by 2026, and 40% of US utility markets use telluride panels. It's far more reliable, you can leave it outdoors, it works in a warm, humid climates better, so a lot of that goes into the desert Southwest. And I was involved in a very recent First Solar factory in India. I was involved at the very high level when the government of India was deciding what factories they should help, incentivize, and there were silicon companies and there were other companies and telluride. And I knew the Prime Minister's advisor who was involved in this indirectly. He's from the same school as I graduated from. And we talked quite a bit, and he came to the lab and we discussed, and I made several presentations. So I can tell you for sure that in a place where it is somewhat infrastructure is quite difficult, a full-blown factory was completely operational in 18 months. In a land that was just considered junk. I mean, nobody would have wanted that for anything. So these guys took it over, built it, and in 18 months later, it's fully working and producing to specification in the Indian market. And modules retain 89% of their power after 30 years, less sensitive to shading power loss, no power loss from LID, light-induced degradation, or light-enhanced thermal-induced degradation. Now, they also have a global recycling service, First Solar does, that if you bought their panels and you didn't want it and you brought it to them, they will take it and they will recycle it for you. Now, they used to pay for the shipping it back to their factory, which they are kind of, once their market picked up, they took that away. So you have to bring it to them and then they will take it. Now here is, it takes 2.5 times less energy to make the panel and 3 times lower water footprint than crystalline silicon. Now the Indian plant doesn't take any water from the city or anything. They make their own water and reuse it, and it's close to a seacoast, so they probably desalinate. I don't know the exact details of it. And most key coefficient PV solution available today from this EP registry. And they have sold out their US manufacturing till 2028. And the plant in Chennai, India is 3.5 gigawatt a year on 125 acres of really bad land. and reached capacity 12,000 modules per day, top module at 535 watts in this 18-month time frame. Now, what comes next in CdTe PV? And as we are involved in it, the main thing we want to do is advance the efficiency, higher, double the efficiency, half the cost of electricity. So there is a strong push to go from the current 20+% to 25% efficiency and then to 28% efficiency. And there is all kinds of different approaches, and we are pursuing a few ourselves to go to higher efficiencies, and we are part of a larger consortium. We call ourselves the CdTe Telluride Manufacturing Advanced CdTe Telluride Consortium, and there is work there. Now, one interesting effect that we have seen is that if you take the standard absorber today is the one that is shown in blue here. The one that is uniform CAD selenium telluride alloy is the one that is shown in the red and yellow there. And if you converted this to an implied efficiency, you get to about 26.5% compared to the other ones being 22%. So there is a 3 or 4% possibility by this metric. This metric is not the only thing. You have to make good contacts to it, and you have to make sure it all works out. But by this metric, which was done with ASU and National Renewable Energy Lab and Department of Energy, you can get a better performance by doing that. Now, I want to come back to the tellurium availability again. Short term, there doesn't seem to be an issue, and Tom can answer that a little better much better than I can. And long term, there may be, because the total volume of production, if you convert it all to CdTe Telluride, you can reach this 400, 500 gigawatts kind of numbers, which we would like to see, and we would like to see in the terawatt range. And this paper is quite an authenticated reference on how much tellurium there is. The blue curve is what we are operating currently under. If we refine the process, it gets to this. We will have about 1,000 tons per year, which roughly works out to be by 60 tons for a gigawatt, about 25, 30, thereabouts. And then you have to go to better processes for improving tellurium, or alternatively go to thinner absorbers and cadmium selenium telluride absorbers. And here is what we have a roadmap. I want to point out that in 1991, when we made our first device, the efficiency was 0%. There was, there was some voltage, about 350 millivolts, and there was no current. But it's the allure of high throughput manufacturing, this idea that if you make it like CAN, that's the energy solution, has stayed with me, and it never wants to leave. So whenever there is a downtime, I just think about if only we do that. So we have improved on that from that to 2016 to 17 to current effort is here. Our ultimate vision is to make a multi-junction where we run at this speed and make 35-40%, which will be electricity at 1 cent a kilowatt hour or free, essentially, in some sense, which will be a bad way to think about in business, but this. Now, one of the other ideas that we developed in the commercialization of cadmium telluride is doing the encapsulation slightly differently. The current encapsulation involves a desiccated PIB and encapsulant. We have replaced that with a much better structure, which there is a booth outside, and it also does better in terms of damp heat. Where this is the standard encapsulation, this is our current encapsulation. And this is the automated line that we have, and this, if you fully convert it, will make hundreds of megawatts a year in terms of programming. And future steps is advance the cell fabrication facility to make a better cell, improve sources for sublimation, and pursue projects for next generation devices, and continue the activity so on. Here are all the references, and here is where I want to stop. And the thing has been we want to make PV electricity a major source of energy. I told my boss then, shouldn't we be thinking about making this is a manufacturing problem which we can kind of solve. Seems to be that way.
Awesome. Thanks, Sampath. So if you have a question, write it on the card and we'll collect them.
I can read it out, Brian, if you want.
I'll read them to you, Sampath. First question, how does it handle hail impacts? You talking about the encapsulation or the cadmium telluride? This was commercialized on 2 feet by 4 feet and passed all the tests. It passes hail impact well. It's a stronger package, basically. So compared to silicon, are cadmium telluride panels more hail resistant or the same?
The
or-
encapsulation technology that Ryan has displayed outside is stronger than the standard encapsulation, and CAD telluride panels pass all the standard tests.
Okay. How are used panels recycled or repurposed, especially regarding toxic cadmium?
The current, even though this is not very desirable, the current recycling by First Solar is to crush the panels and put it in an acid and extract the cadmium and tellurium. Our process would separate it two out. So you get the two glasses out, you can cut the edge seal. The process that we have displayed outside, you can separate it out, and then you can scrape or remove the material inside, or just dip it into acid and etch away the cadmium telluride, or in the case of silicon or perovskites, you can extract the cell itself.
Is it easier to recycle a cadmium
Oh, way
telluride
easier. We have
panel
demonstrated
than
full-blown
silicon?
recycling, and there is an economic advantage to keeping the glass intact and removing the polymers and the material separately, yes.
Follow-up question on the hail question. So what about micro cracks for comparison, I guess, in the silicon versus cadmium telluride?
Now, the
Microcracks?
glass doesn't care whether it is silicon or cadmium telluride. The stress is still the same.
Yeah, it's really about the impact of the glass. What is the acreage per megawatt capacity of cadmium telluride versus, this says versus PV, but I think it means versus silicon.
Okay, if you compare by acreage per gigawatt in terms of nominal startup power, that's different. If you talk about total power production, it's comparable. If you take the best performing CAD telluride module, you take the best performing silicon module, and I look at the acreage to produce a certain amount of power, not instantaneous efficiency, then CAD telluride and silicon are comparable. But if you talk about instantaneous power, this is because higher efficiency, it may produce a little bit more power under certain conditions.
Okay. I'm not quite sure about this question, but has cadmium telluride went to a NRTL for approved listing?
What is NRTO?
NRTL?
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, the First Solar product is fully certified, and it was all certified under standard conditions, yes. Yes, it is. It passes all the. You have to pass all the tests before you sell it.
Yeah. Any other note cards? Any other questions?
Well, what's to stop the Chinese, just as they innovated with silicon, they drove down the cost, they saw the ingot supply problem, and they fixed that, and that's what helped them drive down and become dominant in silicon. What's to stop them from just taking this technology and further driving it down? Is this the technology that's going to help the U.S. regain manufacturing?
It's only manufactured in the U.S. So in a practical sense, it is the case. But back in the day at one time, First Solar was the largest producer of cadmium, of PV panels in the world. I'm talking 2020 timeframe, I may be wrong on this, or 2000 timeframe, sorry. But the Chinese government has supported the industry at all levels, research and subsidies and forgiving loans, and continuous failing is still okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have that system here. Whether can you compete with a system which is forgiving until it makes it? See, in research, it's a question of how long will somebody stay behind you till you get it over. And the Chinese are willing to do it all across. And it turns out that it's not that. I had a serious discussion on this with the Chinese government official, third in the hierarchy. And he said, well, how much do you think the subsidy is? I said, $35 billion is our Department of Commerce estimate. How much do you guys spend on defense? It's $800 billion. So what do you think is a better expense? Right? Our priorities are not placed correct. And that's, we can go on at this at some level. So that's the difference. And they are doing this on electric cars, EV batteries. They have learned one thing that we knew in going to the moon. It was considered an impossible problem. There are papers written that you couldn't do it. But you support it, you get enough good people, keep doing it, keep the focus on, you can solve it. If our government would say we will want to make multi-junction at 35 watts at this kind of speed, and no matter what, I'll support you, we'll be there in 3-4 years from now. At that point, you can't compete with silicon at all. But they will do the same thing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing per se, but if only we could collaborate more and go more, it's him who should see this. So that's the difference.
Do you see any other country or region like the EU? Are they?
Now, I want to say something different about India. The Indian government, as I mentioned, wanted to incentivize solar manufacturing. And they sent an advisor here. And I talked to him, showed him all this data, and he said, well, this and well, that. And then we had 3 meetings. I went there for 3 meetings. Finally, they picked First Solar, among another 2 silicon companies too. The First Solar plant is ready and fully operational. The other 2 are, I don't know where they are, but from what I hear, the polysilicon plant itself is not working. So it's inherently a better technology, but you know the background I'm talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, we need to stop. Thanks, Sampath, for a
Thank
great
you.
talk and questions.